Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for being here for the inaugural UNE Healthcare Story Slam. It's hopefully the first of many, so you can tell your grandchildren that you were here at the beginning. So, yeah, it's going to be great. To get us started, I would like to welcome Provost Karen Pardue to the stage, and I'm going to adjust the mic. Oh, I should tell you, the reason I'm here is to keep things moving and to move the microphone. So I'm going to do that now.
Thank you, Tara. And of course, you do have to move the microphone. So good evening, everyone. I am so honored to have been asked to bring greetings to tonight's Story Slam. I first want to acknowledge the work of Chris Barr, Jackson Schuyler, and Teresa Orlandella, who helped organize tonight's event. I also want to offer our thanks to David Shaw for his commitment to and support of our Shaw Fellows program. I'm not only the provost at the University of New England, but I'm also a registered nurse, and that's a title that I'm very proud of. Therefore, I've had the experience of caring for countless patients and families over the years of my clinical practice. In 2002, I had the opportunity to attend a workshop with Dr. Rita Sharon on narrative medicine with Columbia University Medical College. Dr. Sharon describes narrative medicine as a commitment to understanding patients' lives, caring for the caregivers, and giving voice to the experience of people who are receiving healthcare delivery. Dr. Sharon's work has always resonated with me. As all too often in healthcare, patients get reduced to the anatomy of their illness instead of the experience. A narrative storytelling approach emerges for clinicians when they get to really learn about their patients and what the disease experience has been for them. The beauty of a story or a narrative is it provides opportunity for people to tell their story in their own words. And it gives us the opportunity to think, reflect, and understand them as people. That helps to individualize care, but it also helps to improve the outcomes of the care that we deliver. For patients and families, exchanging stories is essential in processing what has happened to them. In the telling and the retelling of stories, people find meaning in what's happened or purpose in an otherwise difficult or challenging situation. Right now, the current research is also pointing to the benefit to caregivers for being part of narrative. Professional burnout is at an all-time high as we emerge from the pandemic. The opportunity for doctors and nurses and clergy and the caregiving team to come together and exchange their stories gives them opportunity to provide support and resilience for one another. They've collectively experienced something very difficult, and they can emerge from that with a newfound togetherness. I'm pleased that we have the opportunity tonight to hear the stories that will be shared with us. I know we are welcoming colleagues from Southern Maine Health Care, as well as faculty and students. I thank each of them who are being willing to share their unique story. I am confident that I'm going to come away with a new understanding and new insights from the personal perspectives that they're willing to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A couple of words before we officially really more get started. Just a reminder that these are healthcare stories. So a lot of details have been changed because HIPAA. So if you think that you recognize someone in the story, you probably don't. It's probably not who you think. So just to put that out there. Also, as Karen said, we have stories from students, we have stories from faculty, we have students from folks at SHMC, and we have funny stories, we have touching stories. I hope you brought your Kleenex because you may need it. And all of these stories are true stories told from the perspective of the people who are telling them. I have been really privileged to hear all these stories as they've been developed, and I can't wait for you to hear them. So I'm going to stop talking because this is not about me. And I'm going to bring Chris Barr to the stage. Chris is a UNE nursing student and the inspiration behind everything you're going to see tonight. So Chris, come on up.
Yeah. All right. On September 27th, 2019, I was an electrical engineer, and I was at a work conference out in Idaho. After the event, my friend and I decided to go mountain biking because I was a huge bike racer, and we had heard of the beautiful scenery out in Boise. So we rented mountain bikes and walked out of the bike shop with maps in our hands, ready to explore. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital in Boise 2.5 weeks later. When I say waking up, it's not what you usually picture when you hear that term. The right side of my body was completely paralyzed. I couldn't speak, and it seemed as if everything was in a haze. I had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, and those 2.5 weeks were actually spent in a coma. That time in the hospital is still a little foggy to me. I only remember bits and pieces of it. The one thing I do remember, though, is looking at the analog clock up on the wall, realizing that it should mean something to me, but it just didn't. I have a lot of experiences like that, as I spent months in the hospital, relearning how to walk, relearning how to talk, and relearning the cognitive skills that I'd lost. But the I'm not what I was before, but I'm extremely lucky in what I've gained back. I'm extremely lucky not only in my sense of recovery, but in the healthcare providers that I had experiences with. From the ICU nurse in Boise, who kept care of my family while I was unconscious, to Emma, we still keep in touch with her to this day, to the physical, speech, and occupational therapist down at Spalding Rehab in Boston, who I just got lunch with last fall, to the physical therapist at Goodwill Neuro Rehab in Scarborough, who got me on the treadmill running for the first time since the accident, which I never thought was possible. Those people and those experiences really changed my outlook on life. They made me want to get into healthcare in order to pay it forward. I chose nursing because I know what it's like to be the one lying in that bed. And I know what it's like to have nurses who care. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Next, I would like to bring up Deb Kramlich. She is a UNE faculty member from the School of Nursing and Population Health. Come on up.
Great, thank you. The critical care environment is a bit like the ocean, with changing currents, sometimes smooth sailing on calm seas, and other times waves threatening to capsize the ship. Our vulnerable patients, like a ship's passengers, rely on a great crew to keep them from crashing. I'll never forget one of those patients, probably the sickest I've ever cared for. For privacy's sake, I will just describe them as an adult in the prime of their life. Their support person was a sibling very close in age, and they loved adventure. The patient had a chronic illness that never prevented them from their favorite activity, deep sea fishing, but did leave them vulnerable to infection. Unfortunately, what landed them in the critical care unit was an infection that most of us are able to fight off with antibiotics at home. They quickly became so ill that they needed every form of life support. People in this situation are like the Maine weather. Wait a minute and it will change. And that's even scarier when you're out on the open seas. That was true for this person. 1 minute they would be treading water, albeit supported by a life jacket in the form of machines and medications. The next, they would be close to going under. Unlike Maine weather, though, there often isn't a calm after the storm passes, as this condition more often than not ends in death. When you've worked in critical care as long as I had, you feel like you have a pretty solid idea of when to push forward with life support and when to pull back. And usually the team is in agreement, including the patient's family. This patient definitely knocked me off that rock of certainty and left me feeling like I was in shifting sand. When they entered the unit, they made it very clear that they wanted everything done to save them at all costs, and they made their sibling promise that they would uphold their wishes. While that isn't unusual, decisions often change if a patient continues to deteriorate or fails to improve. In this person's case, though, despite multiple setbacks, including the need for kidney dialysis and partial amputation of all 4 limbs, the sibling refused to withdraw support on them and asked that we continue to proceed when the patient couldn't speak for themselves. This patient ended up with an extended stay with us, and over the months, the sibling filled the room with photos of their many adventures. This served as inspiration and motivation for the patient to stay strong and look ahead to the next big catch. It also reminded us of the person in the bed. The sibling was also like a cruise ship director and entertainer, full of mischief, and we never knew what was next on the schedule. That helped to keep things a bit lighter when the clouds rolled in and seas got rough. As I looked around the room at all the photos from those various deep-sea fishing adventures, I couldn't help but think that the patient would probably never be able to do those things again, even if they did survive. And then how would they feel? How would I feel if I was in their position? But I saw their determination and the siblings' insistence that they would adapt to whatever challenges they were presented, and I started to question my assumptions. I also found that I was often the lone dissenter on the team during daily discussions of treatment options and possible outcomes, which felt pretty vulnerable. Sometimes I wondered if I'd be thrown overboard. I hung on for dear life and kept at the forefront the patient's and siblings' wishes, despite the rough seas and the grim forecast. I vowed to be their lifeboat and their safe port in the storm. Well, beyond all expectations, the storm parted and the seas calmed. The patient survived and was eventually able to return home. We crossed paths again when they returned to the hospital for some minor outpatient procedures. They thanked me for never giving up on them. They were able to adapt their boat to enable deep-sea fishing again, and they and their sibling were off on more adventures. Through this experience, I had to adapt my once firmly held beliefs about quality of life, life-altering events, and decisions around life and death. Ultimately, the patient, and by extension, their family, are captains of the ship, and I am just part of the crew.
Next up is Jayden James. Jayden is a COM student right here at UNE. Come on down.
People may not remember what you did, but they will remember the way you made them feel. This was a piece of advice that a nurse had given me on my first day during ride-along training when I was becoming an EMT. Now, I was 16 years old. I didn't have a lot of experience, and I also didn't know much of anything at that point. And that entire shift, all I wanted to do was be able to help, yet somehow I ended up in everybody's way. And honestly, I even felt like I was a waste of space on the linoleum that I was standing on in the emergency room next to the nurse's station right after we had dropped off a patient. So you can imagine how excited I was when the paramedic who was training me that day asked me to fetch the laptop from the ambulance. Finally, something I could do to help. So I seized on this opportunity of redemption, and I started marching out of the emergency room. And I made it through the first set of sliding glass doors, through the vestibule, second set of sliding glass doors. And then I made it to the ambulance, grabbed my laptop, and started making my way back. How could I possibly screw up something as simple as fetching the laptop? It was at this time that I kind of noticed something out of the corner of my eye, and there was another ambulance barreling up the hill towards the hospital. And it was right about, I was about to get to the threshold, and they had ripped open the back of the ambulance, and there was an EMT straddling a patient performing CPR chest compressions. Realizing I obviously needed to get the heck out of the way, I put the laptop under my arm, and I very athletically whisked myself and past the first set of sliding glass doors into the vestibule. I had successfully made it through one time already, and I had seen the end zone just on the other side and start making my way through the second set of sliding glass doors and stop. Now, the next thing that I remember were two exact things, actually. First was what sounded like a mechanical clunking sound, which I can only imagine was some sort of safety system put in the sliding glass doors that shuts down when someone's stuck inside them. And the immense amount of pressure on either one of my shoulders as I stood wedged there. The next 5 seconds or so happened in slow motion. I looked at the bewildered faces in front of me and of all the hospital staff completely flabbergasted at what they were looking at. And I even managed to crane my neck just enough to smush my face against the glass door that was next to me and saw the incoming ambulance crew getting closer and closer. Now, at this point, finally, a security guard grabbed me by the uniform, pulled me as hard as he could, freeing the glass doors and as well as allowing the ambulance crew to follow through into the trauma bay unimpeded, also sending me tumbling down the adjacent hallway. With my shoulders and my ego bruised, I sat down on the bench in the hallway, trying to fathom how I managed to screw up a task that even a trained monkey should have been able to do. And I just sat there thinking, thank goodness, at least I didn't delay any kind of patient care. But how is it possible that in a job that all I wanted to do was help, as I couldn't find a single way to help? And it was at this point that a man sat down next to me in the hallway on the bench, and he asked me how I was doing. And I said, well, it's my first day, and it isn't going well. And I said, how are you doing? And he said, he looked down at his feet, and he said with kind of a shaky voice, they called me down here. They said that my father had collapsed, and that he was brought here by ambulance, and that it's not looking good. Now, we were the only other ambulance in the bay at the time, and we had brought in a child. So I quickly put two and two together and realized that I had just seen his father only a few moments before. And I froze. But the one thing that I remembered was the piece of advice that the nurse had given me, and that people may not remember what you did, but they will remember the way you made them feel. So I said the first thing that popped into my head, which was, why don't you tell me about your dad? And he smiled, still watery-eyed, but he started telling me stories. He shared funny memories from when he was a kid and anything that popped into his head. And after a few minutes, he was summoned to come inside, and he stood up and turned to me and said, "Thank you for listening." And he disappeared beyond the trauma bay doors. Now, I don't know what happened to him or his father, but I'll never forget him. After what is now a 10-year career in EMS and an equally long career in embarrassing moments, and arguably, almost most importantly, as I embark on a career starting to become a doctor, the one thing that I learned was you don't have to hold on to the embarrassing moments, because whenever you're stuck, I finally found something you can always do, and that's listen. Thank you.
Next up is another comm student, Hannah Akri. Come on over.
Every Saturday, I would reintroduce myself to Russell, or Russ, as he liked to be called. As a second year in medical school, I took on the responsibility of being a caregiver to this man. Russ had progressive dementia, which rendered him unable to hold me in his memory. So essentially, I walked on to the set of Groundhog Day. But after 10 minutes or so, he would warm up to me, and we would spend our time together poring over picture books, going for walks, and swapping stories. Russ lived alone with his wife in a small cottage on the coast of Maine. His children had grown up and moved away. I could tell these Saturdays were his social outlet. And truthfully, knee-deep in the trenches of medical school, they were mine too. It was my second time visiting with Russ, and I brought over a fresh pot of mint tea to the table. As I sat down, I noticed his arms outstretched on the table, with his palms facing up. I took a moment to appreciate the kindness in his work-worn hands. And when our eyes met, he asked me to pray with him. I was caught off guard and immediately felt my heart in my throat. I diverted my eye contact and did not know what to say. I stuttered over my words and finally got out, no, I don't know how. I could tell he was disappointed as he poured his cup of tea. Meanwhile, I rapidly flipped the pages of that coffee table book, The Coast of Maine, and the pictures were waves crashing down on rocks as my mind was racing through his question. I felt the weight of his question throughout the following week because, well, I knew it would come again. Thankfully, I had just the mentor to reach out to. He had been a cardiologist and a pastor throughout his career. He assured me I was not the first to struggle with such a situation. He taught me I don't need to hold a religious title to pray with a patient, and that what is most important is a hand to hold, an empathetic explanation of illness, and someone to welcome prayer or spirituality as a part of healing. So next Saturday came around, and I was sitting with Russ in rocking chairs side by side. We were on this beautiful glassed-in wraparound porch, and we were appreciating the sunlight streaming in that afternoon. In a pause in our conversation, our eyes met, and I knew what would come next. Russ asked me to pray with him. Now, it's not often in life you get a do-over. I reached my hands out to hold his, and with a great big smile, I said yes, and I let him take the lead. In perhaps the most intimate of lessons, I learned how important this was to him. And I was so surprised to feel a wave of peace wash over me. Russ taught me so many lessons. He taught me to lean into these moments that make me nervous and not be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone. But more than that, he taught me to react with openness at the bedside if asked to pray with a patient. The word spirituality comes from the Latin term spiritualitas, which actually means breath. And I now welcome that collective breath and prayer as a part of caring for my patients. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Shelley Snow. She's the clinical chaplain at SMHC.
I had just gotten back to my office with my hot hazelnut coffee, unmasked, and my pager went off. So I added my cup of coffee to the 6 other cups on my desk. Martha's dying. I know Martha's family. They were out in the parking lot in their slate blue Suburban. They really liked Amato Italian sandwiches and Chris Stapleton. Within moments, I was in front of the special care unit doors, prepared, baggy blue scrubs. As the doors opened, I was welcomed back into the chaos. Many yellow-gowned professionals, nurses, CNAs, doctors, respiratory therapists, moving skillfully, moving confidently, moving gently. I could see Martha's door, and I kept my eyes as I started to move steadily toward it, aware of the overflowing bins of yellow gowns waiting to be prepared for our use. Walking toward or through sheets, empty sheets from tubes from the most recent intubation. I see Martha's room, and I'm at the door. Take a breath. Oh, I'm not ready. Pump my hands. Tuck my hair. Pinch my N95. Adjust my elastics. My goggles are on. I choose a gown. Aware of the fastens that have been flattened by multiple uses. A glove. Another glove. My shield. I'm ready. Knock on the door. I push it open, and I close it quickly behind me. The room is cool, yet humid. I see Martha. Hi, Martha. It's me, Shelley. I'm back to be with you. I move towards Martha, my eyes on her being, aware of the steady beep, 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 and the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. I take the black cushioned chair and I sit down, gently moving any tubes or wires, careful not to disturb or crowd. I lean in and I take Martha's familiar hand. And now it is just me, my gown, my goggles, my gloves, and Martha. I bow my head.
Next up on the stage is Karen Hussman, UNE faculty in the Health, Wellness, and Occupational Studies Department. Come on up.
One fall Friday, I unexpectedly became a mom. I was working with one of my pediatric occupational therapy clients. We'll call him Cole. Cole was about 4 years old, big blue eyes, funny and sweet, except of course if you placed a demand upon him, in which case he would probably hit, kick, or bite. Cole was also very imaginative, and whenever he came to OT, he would come with a pretend play scenario. Sometimes we were going for ice cream. Other times, he was a dog. But regardless of what he brought, I just played along, introducing activities to work on his fine motor, visual perceptual, and postural skills, thereby getting him to work on things that he ordinarily would have refused through the use of play. This particular Friday, he came in and he said, "Mom, can we play Legos?" So jumping into the game, I said, "Sure, son." And we proceeded to play Legos for the next hour, him calling me mom and me calling him son. But on this particular day, when we left the therapy room, he kept calling me mom. And when we got to the classroom, he kept calling me mom. And when we went out to the library, he kept calling me mom. And all of a sudden, I found myself pretending that I really was his mom. And I kept pretending all weekend long. The next morning, we made little silver dollar pancakes together. And then we went to the park, and I pushed him on the swing, and we looked for bugs under rocks. And later on, we cuddled on the couch with books. And that night, I got him all dressed up in his frog pajamas and tucked him into bed and kissed him on the forehead and said, "Good night, Cole. I love you." And he said, "Love you too, Mommy." Now, of course, I knew this wasn't real, but some little part of me started to think that maybe I really should be Cole's mom. And maybe Cole wanted me to be his mom. And maybe I could do a better job than his own mom, who was a young, single parent with 2 other kids, one of whom had a significant disability. But luckily I knew better. So first thing Monday morning, I went in to talk to one of my colleagues, a psychologist who I often teamed with on our mutual clients. And I told her that Cole had pretended that I was his mom for about an hour. Didn't mention that I'd been thinking about it all weekend. And she looked at me and said, "What a wonderful fantasy for Cole, that he would get to play with his mom alone for a whole hour." And that's when it hit me. Cole didn't need me to be his mom. What Cole needed was for me to help his mom be the best mom she could be. Thank you.
Next up to the stage is Angela Coulombe. Angela is a UNE staff member and a UNE parent. Come on up.
That's good. Here's what I knew about myself at 34. I was selfish, self-centered, impatient, not a good leader, not a good teacher, and with these qualities, an ardent non-breeder. So you can imagine my surprise at discovering I was pregnant. And not only that, I wanted to bring this life into the world, and I wanted to do it via a home birth. I was living in southeast London at the time, and when your pregnancy is confirmed in the UK, you're assigned a midwife. She does all your visits at home, all your healthcare, which is great for selfish people because you don't have to leave your house to go to a hospital until the very last months of your pregnancy, where you are encouraged to attend Meet the Midwife sessions, because even though you are assigned a midwife, they may not be the one who turns up at your birth. So I went to these sessions, and I came away with 2 takeaways. One, with all the sessions I'd been to, and I went to 8 of these, there was one midwife named Nancy who wasn't at a single session. So we all thought she has to be made up because, like, out of 8, come on, she had to have been at one of them. The second thing I took away was, unlike the popular British TV show Call the Midwife, their mantra was, "Don't phone us until you are 100% certain you are in labor because you're wasting our time." So with those two things, those two important pieces of knowledge, 2 days before my due date, I was picking up my parents at Heathrow Airport. They were flying in from the States. I drove to the airport, which is in northwest London. I lived in southeast London, and picked them up. And we immediately got stuck in London traffic on our return trip to my flat. As we were doing so, I started to have these little twinges, and my mother said, perhaps we ought to time them. And I thought, well, this is a great idea because we've nothing else to do in the traffic. And these twinges seemed to be coming every 11 minutes. 2 hours later, when we finally made it home, they were coming every 7 minutes. And my mother said, I think we should phone the midwife. And I said, no, we shouldn't, because we don't want to waste their time. So we weren't phoning the midwife. Instead, I was getting my parents settled into the flat when the phone rang. And it was my partner's mother, Barbara. And Barbara wanted to come over and visit my parents. And I said, that's a great idea. I might be in labor, but why don't you come over anyway, because I'm probably not. So 20 minutes later, Barbara shows up, and she has with her the biggest bottle of Johnnie Walker I have ever seen in my life. Like, she had to have won it at a carnival, because I've never seen a bottle that size in a liquor store ever in my life. So she brought it because she understood my father liked Johnnie Walker, and she came into the house, and she somehow convinced my father, as tired as he was from his travels, that he should open it and drink it with her. And so at this stage, they pour themselves a glass. Now, my little twinges are coming at about every 5 minutes, and my mother says, I think we should phone the midwife. And I say, no, don't phone yet, because we don't want to waste their time. By the time Barbara and my father finished their first glass of Johnnie Walker, I am doing a dance over the banister, and I'm like, this really hurts. And my mother says, I think we should phone the midwife. And I'm like, yes, we should, because if this is Braxton Hicks, I have to rethink my birthing plan. So 15 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. I go and I answer it. And standing there is a woman I have never seen before in my life. And she says, hi, I'm Nancy, the midwife. And I have two thoughts. One is, she's real. And the second is, I don't care if you're the Pope. If you can deliver babies, get in here now. So Nancy comes in, she examines me, and she says, well done, you are in labor. But you need to let me know when you feel the urge to push. And I think, here's a woman who labored for most of the day, didn't realize it. You really think I'm going to know when I have the urge to push? But no sooner do I have that thought, I am like possessed by Linda Blair in The Exorcist, and I think, I have to push. And she re-examines me, and she's like, oh my gosh, you do. But you can't, because we have to get a second midwife here. And I think, we didn't cover that in birthing class, did we? But who knows? So she phones for the second midwife, and the second midwife arrives, but there's a small problem. It is now 4:30 in the afternoon in London, and I live on a cul-de-sac off the A3, which is one of the busiest ring roads in all of London, and there is nowhere for her to park. So she does what any good midwife would do. She just leaves her car in the middle of the road and runs into the flat. And she's hoping someone inside can move it, but she's out of luck because my dad and Barbara have been drinking Johnnie Walker. And there's only my mom, Nancy, and my partner and I. And I'm like, they're not leaving. So she's like, okay, car stays in the road. And that seemed like a good plan until other people who live there wanted to park their car. And the traffic started building up, and I could hear honking of cars and neighbors coming out of their houses and all this commotion. And then there was a knock at the door. And it was my friend Paco. And he had arrived with his son, Joe, because they were delivering a piece of furniture that belonged to my grandfather that they had just refurbished. And Paco comes into the house, and my father explains what's happening. And I hear my father say, just pop your head around the corner and say hi to Angela. And I'm like, do not do that. And Amanda, the midwife, shouts out, park my car. So now Paco has a job. He's got to go outside. He's got to sort the cars out. He's got to do all this and that. And I don't know how he did it, but he did. And he also delivered the piece of furniture. And my father says, would you like to stay and have some Johnnie Walker? And Paco's like, I have a better idea. If Angela's having the baby, I'm going home to get my wife, Jackie, and my daughter, Jade, and Angela's friend, Neos from Barcelona, who's staying with us, and Joe, and we're all going to come back. And he does that. And 15 minutes later, the door goes, and it's Paco and Jackie and Jade and Joe and Neos, and they join my dad and Barbara in the kitchen, and they're all drinking. And then there's another knock at the door, and it's my neighbor Barbara, and beg your pardon, Brenda. And Brenda is like the neighborhood busybody. Like, she lives for this sort of stuff, right? And she wants to know what's going on. And my dad tells her everything that's happening. And he goes, would you like some Johnny Walker? And Brenda says, well, if Angel's having the baby, I'm going to go get our other neighbors, Pete and Jesse. And so minutes later, Pete and Jesse and Brenda show up, and they're all drinking, and now there's a full raging party happening in my house, and there seems to be like an open door policy where anybody who wants to come can join the party. And meanwhile, Nancy says to me, one more push and I can go home and have dinner with my family tonight. So I'm like, okay. And I push, and my son Oliver is born. And everything goes quiet. And I am looking at him and I think, I have never been more in love with a human being ever before in my life. And from this moment onwards, my life is not about me anymore. It's about him. And for every moment and every day I live after this, it will be about him. And then I'm snapped back into reality because word must have got out that I just had the baby, and I hear cheers and glasses clinking and hurrahs and all this sort of stuff. And Nancy washes us up, and we go and we join the party. And I am in the room realizing that I'm in a room now full of people who have given me unconditional love all of my life, and they will now do the same for my son. And despite the chaos and the commotion and the noise, I can't think of a better way to have brought my son into this world. Thank you.
Next up is Scott Morin. Scott is a COM alum and also I'm going to read it. He's a SMHC staff, and I'm getting out of here so he can tell his story.
I have to break character, if that's okay, Tara. The last time I was in this room, I was a medical student. That was 22 years ago. I sat every day in that back row in the very far corner where I couldn't be noticed. A woman sat right in front of that computer, who is now sitting right there, who would become my wife, who is now sitting next to my two kids. So that is a sort of a mind-blowing experience. So I apologize for breaking character. I also apologize for reading off some of my notes. But this was tough to write, so I felt like it would be easier for me to read it. I'm a pulmonary and critical care physician at Southern Maine Health Care right here in Biddeford. I've spent a good part of the last 2 years learning about and treating patients with severe COVID infections. And as you know, living with COVID in our community has been a roller coaster ride. After the arrival of vaccines in the winter and spring of 2021, we felt like we had turned a corner. Cases were down, and our lives seemed to be returning to normal. In July of 2021, the Delta variant took hold in Maine. In August, our hospital started seeing an uptake in hospitalizations and critically ill patients. By fall, we were overwhelmed. Every hospital in New England was filled beyond capacity. Surgeries were canceled due to COVID patients occupying surgical beds. I was working more hours than ever in our ICU. When I was not in the ICU, I struggled to keep up with our outpatient pulmonary practice. I found myself pleading with patients who refused vaccination. I tried to relate my own experiences caring for the sick. Our entire unit and additional makeshift ICU beds on the medical floor were filled with dying or nearly dying COVID patients who almost universally refused vaccination. Some were old and some were young, It seemed to spare only the vaccinated. To those who are vaccine hesitant, I may have convinced a few to get the vaccine. To many, however, my advice was met with indignation or hostility. One patient told me the vaccine was a creation of the eugenicist Bill Gates. Another patient told me the answer wasn't vaccines, but rather to prevent immigrants from bringing in the virus across our southern border. Most simply refused because they didn't trust the medical system. They didn't trust me. Meanwhile, in the ICU, I became increasingly distraught over the absurdity of watching people either die or have their lives destroyed over a preventable illness. Family members often blamed us for their plight. One daughter asked why her unvaccinated father couldn't be transferred to a hospital that could do quote-unquote more for him. She didn't seem to realize I had accepted him in transfer from another overwhelmed hospital that had no ICU, despite our own ICU capacity being stretched beyond thin. Through a feature called My Chart, family members can access the patient's chart. The same daughter asked why I wasn't correcting insignificant lab abnormalities that appeared as red instead of black on our computer screen. One girlfriend of a patient accused me of putting patients on ventilators for the money. Families of other patients often asked why I wasn't prescribing ivermectin. One day I sat across from a nurse being accosted over the phone by a family member. She told me he screamed, "You're the reason people are dying from this," before hanging up the phone. In December, I admitted a patient who was deathly ill. In order to preserve his confidentiality, suffice to say, he was dealing with a common condition that required a simple elective surgical procedure. Unfortunately, the surgery had been canceled several times because COVID patients were filling the beds normally occupied by post-op patients. There was not enough staff or surgical beds to perform surgeries. After several postponements, he developed an infection as a direct result of the delay. The infection was so severe, it resulted in multi-system organ failure. He died shortly after his admission to the ICU. I watched him hold his son's hand as he said goodbye. As I walked out of his room, I looked around our ICU at every unvaccinated patient filling the remainder of our unit and thought, they all have blood on their hands. I found myself coming to work angry. Anger is a dangerous emotion, especially for a medical provider. The sickest patients are often intubated, sedated, paralyzed, and placed on their stomachs for 12 hours or more. It is the only way to maintain their oxygen levels. While in this prone position, gravity pulls fluid into dependent tissues. After being flipped back over, the eyes are often swollen shut. Lips and tongues become engorged with fluid. Anger, combined with this assembly line of horribly sick and disfigured patients, had the effect of dehumanizing the very people I was supposed to be healing. It was around this time I met another young man being transferred to our ICU due to high oxygen needs. He wasn't vaccinated. He was argumentative with staff. He seemed incredulous that he was actually critically ill. His condition deteriorated, and anticipating respiratory collapse, he was placed on mechanical ventilation. Over the next several days, we struggled to keep him alive. His lung collapsed, requiring surgical placement of a chest tube. We attempted last-ditch strategies with a ventilator to improve his oxygen levels. He was placed in a medically induced coma to reduce his body's oxygen demands. Due to COVID restrictions, no visitors were allowed in the hospital. Every morning, I would call his wife and update her on his condition. After several days, she asked if she could call back in the evening. She was hoping his nurse could hold up a phone to his ear so his 7-year-old son could say goodnight. I'll remember that request for the rest of my life. I guess for every action, there is a reaction. Newton's first law states a body in motion tends to stay in motion unless acted upon by another force. I feel like an act of love by a boy for his father changed my emotional trajectory. It took almost 2 months, but our patient survived and eventually went home. After his initial convalescence, it took several weeks before he could talk. It took even longer to gain any semblance of strength. But as he recovered day after day, we got to know each other. He's a good man who loves his family. I hope he's doing okay. I'm relieved the little boy has his daddy back. I'm adapting. I'm tired, but I'm not angry. COVID cases are down, which obviously helps. In the end, I've learned some valuable lessons. People make decisions, sometimes unwise and ill-fated. It's not my job to judge. It is my job to love each individual patient and be part of a team that will make them better. The nurses I work with have shown me the way in this regard. I certainly have renewed love and respect for all my colleagues, but especially the nurses and certified nursing assistants with whom I work. They are an incredible group of men and women. They are collectively the epitome of selflessness and empathy. Thank you.
Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Amy Kirsten, faculty member in the College of Arts and Sciences.
You can't have any visitors. We're shutting down the hospital. I never imagined that those would be the first words spoken to me as they wheeled me back into the labor and delivery room for my unplanned C-section. Not, how are you feeling? Not, your baby is fine. I hadn't even really seen him yet. We're shutting down the hospital. That was Saturday morning, March 14th, 2020. I didn't have an elaborate birth plan. After everything we'd been through, I just wanted this baby to arrive safely and to be healthy. But birth plan or not, I could never have fathomed what was going to transpire over the next few days. I never imagined that we would become increasingly confined to our hotel room as the restrictions kicked in. That was the first time we heard the Q word, quarantine. I remember pleading with a nurse to just let me walk in the hallway, let me move my legs and feel like a human being. She snuck me out because she got it. I never imagined that the sight of snow falling from the sky outside my hospital room window would make me burst into tears. It was that sense of calm and normalcy in this outside world that now seemed so foreign and chaotic. We had entered the hospital in normal times, and I had no idea what I was taking baby Henry into just a few days later. And then I never imagined that I would have to be escorted through security checkpoints on the way out of the hospital. I mean, I've been keeping up with the news, and I thought I knew what was going on. How bad was it out there? And then when I got home, I never could have imagined that I couldn't find diapers and formula for my baby, that it all disappeared from store shelves while we were in the hospital from people hoarding and panic buying. Amazon was shipping 2 weeks out, not 2 days. Now, the diapers I could figure out, because I'm a country girl. But I couldn't find formula, and I didn't know how I was going to feed my baby. And I was in that position because I never imagined that I couldn't breastfeed my baby. I mean, I'd done all of the things. I'd taken the classes, I bought the stuff, I did what I was told, I had friends that were lactation consultants and pediatricians. I tried so hard, and the milk didn't come. And trying to unsuccessfully breastfeed and source formula in a nascent pandemic took every last bit of resilience that I had. It broke me. And I never imagined that I would spend my maternity leave in lockdown with those newborn exhaustion and those postpartum hormones colliding with isolation and this anxiety over this brand new virus that nobody knew anything about. Thank goodness I'd stocked up on food. And you know what? Toilet paper. I never imagined that the Canada-US border would close a week after baby Henry was born, that I'd be cut off from my support system, my friends and my family, and that Henry would be a year and a half old before my grandparents met their first grandchild. I never imagined that 2 years later, on his second birthday, the selfie we took together, I'd be in a mask because I was a close contact, and he is still ineligible for a vaccine. We want to believe that we're in the tail end of this, that we're going to move on and let the vaccine do its job. But for people who have littles that are too young to be vaccinated, this is not over for us. We're exhausted, we're frustrated, we feel forgotten, and we live our lives day by day waiting for that life-changing announcement that our children can have that protection as well. I didn't have a birth plan. I adapted far more than I ever thought that I could imagine, and I'm forever changed. And I know that I'm one of the very lucky ones. Thank you.
Our final story tonight is Jamie Bullock, who is another faculty member from the School of Nursing and Population Health.
Earlier this year, I had a lollipop moment. A full year prior, I was headed off on a massive ski adventure to go cross-country skiing with my whole family in the White Mountains. I was traveling with my husband and our 2 little girls, ages 3 and 6. Also with us were my husband's parents, so we had a full crew. Starting off on this adventure, I knew that I had to be very prepared. In order to do this, I took along with me a trailer that had skis on it. That trailer hooks around my middle, and that's what I ski with the whole time. Generally, my 3-year-old will ski on her own for quite some time, but then gets tired and rides in the trailer. My 6-year-old, however, is always on her skis. She leads the pack in her neon pink waterproof snowsuit. And initially, I thought, maybe that suit color is too much. But after the past year and a half of skiing behind her, I realized it's an amazing way for me to keep track of her while she's barreling through the woods. This particular day was a bluebird day, the kind of day you look forward to in the winter. It was an unbelievably well-groomed and gorgeous cross-country ski track, and we headed off on a 6-mile loop around a mountain. This was an absolutely beautiful trip. We made sure in our ski trailer to bring with us our trusty sub-30 LL Bean sleeping bag, as well as a fleece sleeping bag, and as many snacks as you could possibly imagine. Generally, we always bring hot chocolate. This time, we had 2 hot chocolates because my father-in-law and I forgot to discuss who was bringing the hot chocolate. But anyway, it all worked out. We had an absolutely beautiful day ahead of us. We headed on this trail, again, following my 6-year-old in her bright pink snowsuit. And she was the first to come across a sign that said, "Caution, steep hill." Now, she can read at this point, but she went for it. That's the type of kid she is. So she started down what was initially a more gradual decline or descent, and then became a very steep drop at the bottom. I, as you can imagine, was wearing the ski trailer, but I skied faster than I have ever skied in my life to keep up with her. It was a little bit scary, a lot of bit scary. And when we were at the bottom of the hill, I thought, wow, that was exhilarating and terrifying, and I need to make certain to not do that again. So we skied the additional 1.5 miles out and headed off for the rest of our day. The next day, we decided, wow, that was beautiful yesterday. We should go back. This day was a little bit gray, a little bit overcast, and a little colder. As you can imagine, because of the nice warm sun the day before, that drop in temperature and snow melt made for pretty icy conditions underneath our skis. Now that generally can be pretty fun. It means you go a little bit faster when you're cross-country skiing. And so we headed off on our route and came around the mountain just in the same way. Now in the middle of our trip, my husband and I checked in with each other. We said, hey, we really shouldn't do that hill again. That was too much. That was scary. I'm glad that everything worked out, but that was a little scary. We both agreed. And as our oldest got to that point with the caution hill sign, she stopped. And we all started to take our skis off. At that very moment, a woman who was in her mid-60s came running up the hill and said, stop, do not go down this hill on your skis. Luckily, we had our skis almost off. She shared that a person had fallen and was at the bottom of the hill. We started to walk down the hill, which is no easy feat when you're strapped into a ski trailer, but we made it. And we came to find an older adult lying on the ground at the bottom of the hill. They had attempted that hill, that steep descent, and had had an accident. I realized that this person was seriously injured, and I took a moment to think, is there enough time to get my little girls away from this situation so I can go back and help? I realized that the person was talking, that the person was breathing, and I managed to step 100 feet away with my children and my family and set them up and quickly ran back up the hill. I got down on my knees and started to talk with this person. I started to do an evaluation, an assessment. I wanted to see what was happening with them, and I also wanted to do what we all know so well in healthcare, which is to assess what we might need to do next. I found from the people who had found them at first that they had called the emergency medical service and that they were told it would take 45 minutes for them to get there via snowmobile. I knew based on the likely injury of this person that I should not move them. And so I quickly decided that my biggest concerns were that of hypothermia and potentially shock. I ran back to my ski trailer where luckily I had a -30 LL Bean down sleeping bag. What are the odds? I ran back up to the patient and I put it on and I covered them up. I got the fleece sleeping bag and I covered them up. I took my jacket off and made it their pillow. I then took all the hand warmers that I had prepared for the cold little hands, warmed them up, and offered them to the person to warm their chest. I found that the people that had found them were offering the person little pieces of chocolate candy because they had no idea what to do. And I said, stop. I knew that this person was likely going to need surgery as soon as possible. Soon thereafter, we found that the person was completely alone. And so I gave them my telephone and they called their spouse. They weren't able to reach them. The one thing I noted from the conversation was how incredibly calm and factual the person was about the situation. If I was calling my spouse, I don't know if my spouse could have understood what I was saying because I'd be blubbering so much. But they weren't able to reach them. About 45 minutes after I had initially gotten there, I heard the whir of a snowmobile, and I was so relieved. 2 paramedics came up with a sled trailer behind them, and we ended up getting my husband to come help, and we all worked together to keep the person immobilized while we brought them to the sled. Now, knowing the injury they suffered and knowing how much pain they were in, I drew on things that I have done in the hospital time and time again, where I use guided imagery to help them, talked them through their pain, talked them through what to expect. Yes, this is going to be very painful. Yes, there's nothing we can do to help you. Yes, we are going to work on something that you find positive in your mind to help relieve what must be excruciating. As they drove off, I knew that they were in good hands. I went back to my family and I checked in with my daughters. I checked in because I wanted to know how they were doing. I wanted to know that they were okay despite what was a very intense experience, despite having to watch mommy be nurse practitioner mommy and what that means and what that experience is like for small children. We skied our way out that day, the 1.5 miles, and the sun was setting as we got back to the parking lot. I dialed that number once again, and I reached their spouse. I explained what had happened. I explained the hospital I assumed that they would be taken to, and we got off the phone. My family headed back to Maine that night. We stopped for pizza. We got dessert. We tried to do everything we could to uplift the scenario. And that wasn't our last time skiing that year. And it wasn't our last time skiing this year either. We ski a lot, and often we would see an older adult while skiing and think, wow, that's intense what happened when that person was skiing alone and they were seriously hurt. That is intense. And we'd wonder, I wonder what happened to them. For a couple months after the accident, I did check the local newspapers. I did check to see if there was any word of what had happened because I feared some of the worst and really hoped for the best. A couple of months ago, I got a phone call. That date didn't ring a bell in my head, but it meant everything to the person who was calling. It was 1 year from the moment of the accident, and this person had spent the past year trying to figure out who I was. They called me and they thanked me for saving their life. They thanked me for how calm I was. They thanked me for being there on that day and being prepared as I was to help them. They shared that they did have surgery after the experience and that the very next day they were going in for their last surgery to get them back to where they were before the accident. This was so powerful. This gift, this lollipop was telling me I truly mattered to this person and I truly made a difference. And that bond that we share, that I share with someone who is a complete stranger before that moment, is a bond that will stay with me for my entire life. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, storytellers, for sharing those stories. That was 10 stories. There are hundreds, thousands more stories out there that don't get told, but that are happening. So just extrapolate. Think about that. And before we end the evening, I would like to bring the other 2/3 of the Story Slam production company up to the stage, Teresa and Jackson, to wrap it up.
There we go. Oh, hold on. There you go. Sorry, a bit tall. First off, we'd like to sincerely thank everyone for coming out tonight. From the bottom of our hearts, all of us at the Shaw Fellowship, all of us from UNE, and all of us from SMEHU, we'd just like to thank you sincerely for coming out. We'd also like to sincerely thank all of our guest speakers again, all of the students, faculty, and healthcare professionals from both UNE and SMHC. Thank you so much for your stories, and thank you so much for talking. But we'd also like to thank Tara McDonough, above all. Without her help and her facilitation of these stories, they were able to reach their full potential and what they really could be. And she'd also helped make this event production and all of the stylings and everything that you see here fully possible. So we'd like to first off present her with this. And we'd again like to thank you all for coming, and we'd also like to, again to thank everyone for speaking. Thank you.
I'm going to put this down. I'm going to do my job. I got work to do still. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Like Tara said, my name's Teresa. I've been working with Chris and Jackson on the innovation team. First and foremost, I'd like to give another big round of applause for all of our speakers tonight. I know it's really difficult coming up here in front of a bunch of people and sharing a really personal story, and you guys did a fantastic job, so thank you very much for that. I'd also like to thank David Shaw and the innovation team for making all of this possible. It was really fun working with people in the community and all of the faculty here, as well as behind the scenes with media and everybody who set this up, so thanks again. And finally, thank you, everyone who came tonight. I think when we started this whole idea, we didn't really know where it was going to go. We all had a separate vision, but seeing you all here made it possible, and so I really want to thank you for that. Speakers, we have gifts for you out in the lobby, and for everyone else, there are refreshments as well, so if you'll all join us, that would be great. Thank you very much.